There are moments in life that do not announce themselves with noise, yet they alter everything that comes after them. And this is one of those moments. What is happening right now is not random, and the fact that you found yourself here at this exact time is not something your logical mind can fully explain yet. A deeper part of you recognized something before your conscious awareness could put words to it. There is a reason your attention stopped here. There is a reason your spirit reacted before your thoughts did. Because today, May 12th, carries an energy that does not belong to ordinary time. This is not just another passing day buried among countless others on a calendar. This is a threshold moment, a rupture in the familiar structure of reality where invisible forces begin pressing against the surface of your life, rearranging patterns that once felt fixed, loosening timelines that seemed permanent, and activating movements behind the scenes that your human eyes cannot fully perceive yet. Something has already started shifting around you, even if you have not completely understood the scale of it. You may have sensed it as restlessness. You may have felt it as emotional pressure, strange exhaustion, sudden detachment, or the growing awareness that the version of life you have been holding on to no longer fits the person you are becoming. That feeling was never meaningless. It was preparation. Because what is unfolding now is larger than motivation, larger than coincidence, and larger than simple inspiration. This message is not arriving in isolation. It is part of a deeper awakening process that has already begun inside you, a restructuring of how you interpret reality, how you respond to intuition, how you understand abundance, and how you finally step into alignment with the life your soul has been trying to move toward. Long before your conscious mind was ready to accept it. Right now, you are being asked to become fully present inside this moment, instead of passively observing it from a distance. This is not entertainment. This is participation. Every action you take from this point forward becomes a signal, a declaration that you are no longer standing outside your transformation, waiting for certainty before you move. The energy surrounding today does not pause itself to comfort hesitation. It does not slow itself down to accommodate fear. Something irreversible has already begun moving beneath the surface of your life. And if you are honest with yourself, you have been feeling the pressure building for a long time. It has appeared in subtle ways first, a strange tension underneath ordinary moments, the sensation that something in your world was quietly rearranging itself without your permission. Plans that once felt secure begin slipping apart. Situations you trusted suddenly lose their stability. People you believed would remain forever begin drifting away, changing, or disappearing entirely. Entire structures that once gave you certainty begin cracking without warning. At first it feels personal, it feels chaotic, it feels unfair. Your mind searches desperately for explanations because human nature always tries to restore control when reality begins changing faster than expected. But what if none of this destruction was actually punishment? What if these collapses were not evidence that your life was falling apart, but proof that something greater had started intervening on your behalf? Because this is what happens when divine realignment begins taking priority over human expectation. There comes a moment when the path your personality planned can no longer compete with the assignment your soul came here to fulfill. And when that moment arrives, life begins removing what no longer aligns, even if your emotions still want to hold on to it. This intervention does not happen softly. It does not arrive as a gentle suggestion. It arrives with force. It rewrites the direction you thought your future would take. It removes people, closes doors, interrupts timelines, and dismantles identities that were never designed to carry you into the next stage of your evolution. That is why resisting it feels exhausting. Deep down, you already know this movement is larger than your fear. You already know something inside you has been preparing for this shift long before this day arrived. Even before the disappointments, before the confusion, before the loneliness you rarely explained to anyone else, there was always a quiet awareness living inside you that refused to disappear. A feeling that your path would never look ordinary. A sense that your life carried a different rhythm from the people around you. You may have tried to suppress that knowing. You may have attempted to blend into safer patterns, quieter expectations, more predictable versions of existence. But no matter how hard you tried to silence that deeper recognition, it always returned. Because it was never fantasy. It was memory. It was your spirit remembering something your conscious mind had not fully awakened to yet. There has always been an invisible marking on your life, not something visible to the outside world, but something your soul has carried since the beginning. And now that dormant force is rising again with intensity that cannot be ignored anymore. This time it is not whispering softly in the background. It is demanding your attention. It is pulling you toward a crossroads where pretending no longer works. And if you look backward with honesty instead of pain, you can finally begin recognizing the pattern hidden beneath your past. The endings that devastated you. The opportunities that vanished right when success felt close enough to touch. The relationships that dissolved without explanation. The situations that collapsed before they could fully stabilize. At the time you interpreted those moments as rejection, failure, abandonment, or loss. You believed something had gone wrong. But perspective changes everything when awakening begins. Because now another truth starts revealing itself beneath those experiences. Those interruptions were not random attacks against your life. They were precise corrections. Necessary disruptions designed to prevent you from building your future inside structures too limited to contain the magnitude of who you are becoming. Some versions of your old life had to collapse because they were too small for your expansion. Some people had to leave because they could not travel where your spirit is now being called. Some paths had to close because they would have trapped you inside realities that no longer matched your purpose. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it confused you. Yes, there were moments you questioned everything. But even those painful seasons were preparing the ground for what is beginning now. Because today something new starts anchoring itself into your reality. Not as fantasy, not as wishful thinking, but as a deeper alignment, finally beginning to take form after years of invisible preparation. And before this next stage fully unfolds, there is one truth you must allow yourself to understand completely, beyond fear, beyond hesitation, and beyond the limits of what your mind has been conditioned to believe. What is waiting for you is not fragile, uncertain, or drifting somewhere beyond your reach, hoping one day to appear. It already exists with complete clarity beyond what your current eyes can fully perceive. There is already a version of your reality where the confusion that once exhausted you no longer carries power over your mind, where every painful delay suddenly reveals itself as part of a design so precise that it changes the way you interpret your entire past. There is already a path where the wounds you once tried desperately to hide become the exact source of your purpose, wisdom, and transformation. That reality is not fantasy, and it is not reserved for people who seem more gifted, more spiritual, or more deserving than you. It belongs to you specifically. It has always belonged to you. The only thing changing now is that something far greater than human effort has begun drawing your current life toward that destined alignment with undeniable force. This is not random luck appearing at the perfect time. It is not coincidence disguised as meaning. It is the activation of a deeper order that has been moving underneath your experiences long before you became consciously aware of it. And once this alignment begins accelerating, everything around you starts reorganizing itself accordingly. Seen and unseen forces begin adjusting. Situations shift. Emotional attachments weaken. Certain paths dissolve while others emerge unexpectedly. The structure of your reality begins responding to a timeline that has already been formed beyond the limitations of your present perspective. It is understandable if part of you questions why this transformation did not arrive sooner. Human nature always searches for reasons when powerful change finally appears after long periods of struggle. You may wonder why you had to endure disappointment after disappointment before reaching this moment. You may question why the waiting felt endless, why the lessons felt so heavy, why life seemed to hold you back while others moved forward with ease. But the truth is more complex than simple delay. This could not have unfolded earlier because there was an internal threshold that first needed to be crossed. There was a deeper resistance inside you that had to weaken before true transformation could fully enter your life. There comes a point where remaining trapped inside familiar pain becomes more unbearable than risking the uncertainty of change. Your soul reached that point before your conscious mind could understand what was happening. Quietly and without announcement, something inside you made a final decision. A silent declaration that the old version of your existence could no longer continue repeating itself. A recognition that evolution was no longer optional. And the moment that internal shift occurred, everything began responding immediately. Not slowly, not cautiously, but with exact precision. What is happening now is the consequence of that decision finally echoing into your physical reality. This is the beginning of movement, not because you suddenly became fearless, not because you finally understood every answer, but because some deeper part of you became ready enough to stop resisting the transformation trying to enter your life. And once that movement begins, comfort is no longer the priority. Expansion becomes the priority. That is why something inside you continues listening right now instead of turning away. There is a reason these words feel heavier than ordinary information, a reason they settle into your awareness differently, almost as if some forgotten part of you already recognizes them before logic can explain why. What you are experiencing is not simple curiosity, it is recognition. Not recognition of something outside yourself, but recognition of something that has always existed within you, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Beneath your thoughts, beneath your doubts, beneath years of conditioning that taught you to question your intuition, there has always been a signal trying to reach your awareness. And now that signal is becoming impossible to ignore. This message is not placing new truth inside you, it is uncovering truth that was buried beneath fear, survival distraction, and emotional exhaustion. As that realization deepens, something else begins happening simultaneously. The momentum accelerates, because awareness is never passive. Awareness changes reality. The moment you truly see differently, your direction changes, whether you realize it immediately or not. New movement begins the instant consciousness expands beyond old limitations. And right now, movement has already started. As this deeper realignment intensifies, you will begin noticing strange reflections of your internal shift appearing throughout your external world. At first, the signs may seem subtle, small disruptions, unusual timing, conversations that suddenly feel loaded with hidden meaning, repeating numbers appearing too often to dismiss, encounters that feel strangely orchestrated, situations aligning with such precision that coincidence no longer feels like a satisfying explanation. Yet alongside these confirmations, other parts of your reality may begin unraveling at the exact same time. This is where many people misunderstand the process and panic, because awakening often arrives with duality. One timeline begins opening while another begins collapsing. Something new anchors itself while something old loses stability. You may feel emotionally disoriented during this stage, as though reality itself is shifting beneath your feet faster than your mind can process. In truth, that is exactly what is happening. The life you once identified with is loosening its hold because it can no longer sustain the consciousness emerging inside you. What you are witnessing is not punishment or chaos without meaning. It is the dismantling of patterns, attachments, and realities that were never meant to accompany you into this next stage. Do not ignore the signs appearing around you now. They matter more than you realize. They are confirmation that the transformation is no longer happening only inside your thoughts or emotions. It is now reaching directly into your physical life, altering circumstances, relationships, opportunities, and perceptions in ways that cannot be reversed. And at this point, everything depends on how you interpret what is unfolding. The same experience can appear devastating or sacred depending on the level of awareness through which you view it. This becomes the real test. Not whether you are strong enough to suffer, but whether you are conscious enough to recognize alignment, even when it arrives disguised as disruption. When something falls apart, your first instinct may be fear. Your mind may immediately search for control, answers, or ways to restore what is disappearing. But this is the moment where deeper perception becomes essential. Ask yourself, what if this is not loss at all? What if this is reality removing what cannot continue traveling with you? What if these endings are not evidence that life is abandoning you, but evidence that your path is finally becoming precise? Because divine realignment rarely operates through comfort or predictability. It operates through exactness. It strips away illusions that kept you attached to smaller identities. It removes distractions that delayed your evolution. It breaks emotional bonds that anchored you to outdated versions of yourself. And while that process may feel intense, unsettling, or even painful in the moment, it is also the very thing creating space for the life that was always waiting beneath the surface to finally emerge. What appears to be disorder in your life right now is not actually disorder at all. It only feels chaotic because you are trying to interpret a higher level of transformation through the limited perspective of your old reality. But beneath the confusion, beneath the emotional instability, beneath the sudden changes that seem impossible to control, there is an intelligence moving with precision far beyond what your mind is accustomed to recognizing. This is not collapse without meaning. It is reconstruction happening from a level your current awareness is only beginning to understand. And the moment you stop fighting what is unfolding, the moment you stop demanding certainty before surrendering to the process, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop moving against the current of your evolution and begin flowing with it. That is the exact point where acceleration enters your life. Because resistance slows transformation, but trust multiplies movement. One of the hardest parts of this transition will not come from circumstances themselves, it will come through people. You're going to notice subtle changes first. Interactions that once felt natural suddenly feel strained. Conversations that used to energize you begin feeling hollow or exhausting. Certain relationships lose their emotional resonance without warning. You may find yourself sitting beside someone who has been part of your life for years and suddenly realizing the connection no longer reaches you the same way it once did. Some people will disappear quickly, almost overnight, without explanation or closure. Others will fade more slowly, becoming distant in ways you cannot fully define. And then there will be those who remain physically near you while emotionally feeling worlds away. This part hurts because the human heart naturally interprets distance as rejection. But this is not rejection, it is recalibration. Not every soul was meant to continue with you beyond a certain stage of your growth. Some connections were designed only for specific lessons, specific seasons, specific versions of your identity. They were never intended to accompany you into the next expansion of your life. As your internal frequency changes, the energetic structure of your reality changes with it. The people who cannot resonate with that evolution begin naturally falling out of alignment. That process can feel lonely if you misunderstand it. It can make you question your worth, your choices, even your direction. But what feels like loss now is actually preparation happening in real time. The empty spaces forming around you are not punishment. They are making room for what is meant to arrive next, because new realities cannot fully enter lives that remain overcrowded with expired attachments. There will also come a stage in this process that feels strangely silent, not peaceful silence, not resolution, but suspension, a stillness so unfamiliar that it almost feels unsettling. It will seem as though life itself has paused between two realities. You may feel disconnected from the past while still unable to fully touch the future forming ahead of you. During this phase, the mind becomes restless because it interprets silence as absence. It assumes that nothing is happening simply because visible movement has temporarily slowed. But this quiet phase is one of the most powerful parts of the entire transformation, because this silence is not emptiness, it is incubation. It is the invisible stabilization of a new timeline before it becomes physically visible in your external reality. Think about the ocean before a massive wave rises toward the shore. There is a brief moment where everything appears still, but underneath the surface, momentum is gathering with incredible force. Energy is collecting itself, direction is forming. The movement has already begun even before the eye can perceive it. This quiet period in your life carries that same energy. It is not stagnation. It is preparation at a level deeper than action alone could ever create. And if you become impatient during this phase, if you attempt to force answers, force relationships, force movement simply because silence makes you uncomfortable, you risk interfering with something sacred that is still taking shape beneath the surface. Because what is being built now is far greater than anything your old methods of control could produce. As the world around you continues shifting, another process will begin intensifying inside you. Resistance will rise. Old fears you believed you had already overcome will suddenly return with unexpected strength. Doubts you thought were gone will begin whispering again. You may feel an urge to retreat back toward old patterns, simply because familiarity feels safer than transformation. This is where many people misunderstand the process and believe they are failing. But this is not failure, it is exposure. The deeper realignment happening in your life is not only changing external circumstances, it is illuminating every hidden attachment within you that still belongs to the old version of your reality. Fears that once operated unconsciously are now being dragged into awareness so they can no longer control your future from the shadows. That is why this stage can feel emotionally intense. One part of you senses expansion, while another part desperately clings to the familiar. Even when the familiar no longer nourishes your spirit, you may feel divided between who you were and who you are becoming. But understand this clearly. You are not moving backward. You are being shown exactly what must finally be released, so your next chapter can fully stabilize. Every fear surfacing now is an opportunity disguised as discomfort. Every doubt is an invitation to choose differently than you did before. Every emotional trigger reveals another doorway into a higher version of yourself. Then, when you least expect it, a moment arrives that changes everything internally. It may happen through a single conversation, a sudden opportunity, an unexpected realization, a flash of clarity so sharp that it cuts through years of confusion within seconds. And when it happens, you will not experience it merely as an idea. You will feel it as certainty in your body, a deep knowing that bypasses logic entirely. In that moment, something inside you will finally recognize that the transformation is real. You will understand that your reality has already changed, even if every external result has not fully appeared yet. This becomes the turning point where doubt begins losing its power. The invisible suddenly becomes tangible. The shift you have sensed emotionally begins revealing itself through undeniable confirmation your mind can finally comprehend. And once that awareness locks into place, you cannot return to unconsciousness again, because you will have already seen too much. You will have felt the difference too deeply. You will know that the old reality no longer fully exists for you in the same way. After that, the evidence begins appearing more consistently, not through one dramatic explosion, but through a sequence of precise alignments that connect together with undeniable intelligence. Opportunities arrive at exactly the right time. Certain people enter your life carrying energy that immediately feels familiar and aligned. Decisions that once overwhelmed you suddenly become simple and clear. Situations that previously required exhausting effort begin unfolding with unexpected ease. Doors that once remained closed begin opening naturally. This is the moment where your new timeline fully starts anchoring into physical reality. What once existed only as potential now begins becoming lived experience. And with every alignment that follows, the life you once hoped for stops feeling distant and starts becoming the reality you are actively stepping into. There comes a stage in this transformation where the road ahead no longer feels unstable or fragmented, not because every question has already been answered, and not because life suddenly becomes flawless, but because something deeper finally falls into alignment. You begin to notice that the constant inner confusion that once drained your energy starts losing its grip. In its place arrives a grounded sense of certainty that cannot always be explained logically, yet feels undeniable within your spirit. Even while unknowns still exist, even while parts of the future remain invisible, trust begins replacing fear. Not blind trust born from denial, but a deeper trust that emerges after surviving enough uncertainty to recognize that every disruption carried hidden direction. You start understanding that you are no longer wandering aimlessly through random circumstances. You begin feeling that what is unfolding around you has intention behind it, that the force guiding this transition has not abandoned you halfway through the process. The divine override that dismantled parts of your old reality is still operating now, not through destruction anymore, but through alignment. And as this realization settles into you, another shift begins quietly taking place inside your identity itself. At first it is subtle, almost impossible to notice in a single moment. But eventually, something irreversible starts rooting itself within you. It does not arrive dramatically. It does not announce itself loudly. Yet once it settles, there is no undoing it. You start realizing that the version of yourself you once inhabited no longer fits the person you are becoming. The old habits feel foreign. The reactions you once repeated automatically begin feeling unnatural. The ways you tolerated disrespect, emotional exhaustion, confusion, or limitations suddenly become difficult to revisit. There may even be moments where you attempt to return briefly to your old patterns simply because familiarity once made you feel safe, but it no longer works. What once felt normal now feels forced, heavy, disconnected from your spirit. It becomes similar to trying to wear clothing that belonged to another lifetime. Technically, it still exists, but it no longer carries your energy. This can feel strange because the human mind often interprets identity shifts as loss. But this is not the loss of yourself. This is the transcendence of who you used to be. The transformation happening now is not only changing the direction of your life, it is changing the person walking that path. And once that internal evolution fully begins, there is no authentic way to return to unconsciousness again. Only temporary attempts to revisit what your soul has already outgrown. The version of life waiting ahead requires a different version of you to exist within it. One no longer defined by past fear, old limitations, or survival-based identity. And whether you fully recognize it yet or not, that new self has already started emerging from within you. One of the most intense parts of this process is the clarity that follows. People often imagine clarity as something immediately peaceful, uplifting, or emotionally comforting. But the clarity arriving now carries weight to it. It is the kind of awareness that strips illusions away completely. The kind that forces you to see people, patterns, and situations exactly as they truly are, rather than how you hoped they were. This clarity reaches deeply into every corner of your life. You begin recognizing emotional cycles you once ignored. You notice truths that your mind previously avoided because facing them felt too uncomfortable. Certain relationships suddenly reveal dynamics you can no longer excuse. Certain environments expose how much of yourself you were shrinking simply to maintain familiarity, and once you see these things clearly, there is no way to unknow them again. That is why this stage can feel emotionally heavy, even while it is liberating at the same time, because truth dismantles illusion permanently. Yet this deeper awareness is necessary for where you are heading next. The reality now forming around you cannot be sustained through denial, self-deception, or emotional blindness. It requires truth as its foundation. Even when that truth initially hurts, it also becomes the very thing that frees you. It removes confusion from your path. It dissolves hesitation that once kept you trapped between decisions. It gives direction to your spirit, even when that direction demands painful change. And as this internal clarity deepens, people around you begin sensing the difference before you ever explain it aloud. You may never directly announce what is happening inside you, yet others will still feel it. Your energy starts communicating something unmistakably different. The way you respond to situations changes, the way you carry yourself shifts, the tolerance you once had for draining patterns disappears. Some people will feel magnetically drawn toward this transformation without understanding why. Others will become uncomfortable in your presence because your energy no longer validates the same dynamics it once accepted unconsciously. You do not need to defend or explain this shift. It speaks for itself naturally. Energy always communicates before words do, and your energy is no longer broadcasting confusion, desperation, or emotional instability. It is becoming stronger, clearer, and more anchored in something authentic. Because of that, your environment begins rearranging itself accordingly. The people entering your life start reflecting your new frequency. Opportunities begin aligning differently. Interactions change. The reality responding to you changes because what you embody internally determines what can now align externally. Yet even as all of this unfolds, there remains one final layer that still asks to be released. One final attachment connected to the old timeline. And this part is often the hardest because it does not appear obvious. At first, it hides quietly beneath the surface. It may be an emotional attachment, a belief, a role, or a subtle identity you have carried for years because it once gave you a sense of safety, significance, or control. It may even be something you convinced yourself you still needed in order to feel secure. But now life is asking you to let it go gently. Not through force, not through struggle, but through acceptance, through understanding that continuing to hold on to it would only tether you to a version of yourself your soul has already moved beyond. This release is not punishment, it is expansion. You are not losing something essential, you are creating space for something larger than your old identity was capable of holding. And once you finally stop resisting that last surrender, something changes immediately inside you. The shift may not appear externally right away, but internally it feels undeniable. A strange lightness begins replacing emotional heaviness. An openness enters your spirit where tension once lived. You realize you are no longer carrying burdens that were never meant to continue traveling with you into this next chapter. And from that point forward, even when the outside world still appears quiet, movement continues everywhere beneath the surface, because while your conscious mind searches for visible proof, an invisible realignment is already unfolding with extraordinary precision. Paths are adjusting behind the scenes. Connections are quietly forming before you meet them physically. Opportunities are positioning themselves in exact timing. Realities are reorganizing themselves around the version of you that is finally ready to step fully into alignment with what was always waiting for you.